The freighter called the Iron Drift was not a pretty ship. It was old, loud, and it smelled like engine grease and recycled air. The hallways were narrow, the lights flickered in the lower decks, and the coffee machine near Bay 3 had been broken for 6 weeks. Nobody had fixed it. Nobody seemed to care enough. Cole Harmon cared. Not about the coffee machine, he had given up on that, but about everything else that kept the ship running. He was 34 years old, average height, average build, with calloused hands and a quiet way of moving through spaces like he was trying not to bother anyone. He had been a medic in the army once. Now he fixed pressure valves and air filters on cargo ships, and that suited him just fine. He did not talk much. He ate alone most days. He kept a small toolkit in his jacket pocket and a habit of noticing things other people walked past without looking at. That habit had saved lives before, in another life, in another kind of corridor that smelled like smoke instead of grease. The Iron Drift was 3 days out from the edge of what most people called neutral space, the wide stretch of stars that sat between human territory and the dominion of the Velhari Empire. The Velhari were tall beings, silver-skinned, with 4 fingers on each hand and eyes that caught light in a way that made them look like they were always slightly glowing. They were old as a civilization, proud to the point of being cold, and they did not think much of humans. Most of them considered humanity a young and clumsy species that had gotten into space before it was truly ready. The ship was carrying cargo, officially. Unofficially, it was carrying something else, a diplomatic party traveling in quiet, without announcement or ceremony. Cole did not know this. Most of the crew did not know this. The captain knew, and kept it that way. Among the passengers in the sealed section of Deck 4 was a Velhari woman named Ethan Vel. She was the 3rd heir to the Velhari imperial throne, which meant she was important in ways that came with guards and protocols and an entire lifetime of never being fully alone. She was traveling without the usual display of rank, dressed plainly by Velhari standards, with only a small security detail. The purpose of the trip was quiet diplomacy, early conversations between her people and human governments, the kind that happen in the background before anyone is ready to announce them. She had been on the ship for 2 days and had not left her quarters much. The guards rotated in shifts. One of them, a tall Velhari soldier named Rath Vel Soren, was standing near the door to her quarters on the morning that everything changed. Cole was in the corridor 2 sections down, on his knees beside a wall panel. There was a pressure irregularity in the ventilation line that ran through the lower half of Deck 4, and he had been tracking it for the better part of an hour. He had a light clipped to his collar and a wrench in his hand, and absolutely no idea that the panel 3 meters ahead of him had something attached to it that did not belong there. He noticed it the way he noticed most things, slowly, then all at once. A wire that was the wrong color. A small device pressed flat against the inner frame of the panel, barely visible unless you were already on the floor looking sideways. He stared at it for a moment. His hands went still. He had seen devices like this before. Not exactly like this, but close enough that his body remembered before his brain finished the thought. In the army, in a building that no longer stood, on a day he did not like to think about. He got to his feet slowly. The corridor was quiet. He took 2 steps toward it and then heard movement behind him, the guard, Rath, coming around the corner on his patrol route. The Velhari soldier saw Cole near the panel and stopped. His hand went to the weapon at his side. Cole raised both hands. He opened his mouth to say something. He was not sure what, maybe just wait, or I found something, but the device chose that moment to activate. There was a high, sharp sound, like metal under pressure giving way all at once. And then Cole moved. He did not think about it. He did not weigh the options or calculate the risk or decide anything at all. He shoved the guard sideways with one arm and turned toward the source of the heat, the open doorway where Ethan had stepped out just a moment before, drawn by the sound, standing exactly where the blast was going to go. He put himself between her and it. The explosion was not enormous by any military standard, but in a narrow corridor on a ship, it was more than enough. The force hit Cole like a wall. He felt the heat first, then the pressure, then nothing for a while. He hit the deck and did not get up. Ethan stood untouched in her doorway, her silver skin unmarked, her eyes wide in a way that Velhari faces almost never showed. The guard was on the floor, shaken but breathing. Smoke drifted through the corridor lights. Somewhere further down the ship, an alarm began to sound. Cole Harmon lay on the floor of the iron drift and was very still, and nobody in that corridor, not the princess, not the guard, not the ship's automated systems blinking awake, knew quite what to do next. Cole woke up not knowing where he was. That was not a new feeling. He had woken up in strange places before, field stations, cramped bunks on ships, once in a ditch during a mission that had gone sideways in ways nobody had planned for. But this was different. The surface beneath him was smooth and warm, like lying on something that was alive without being an animal. The light above him was soft and blue-white, and it did not flicker. The air smelled clean in a way that ship air almost never did. He tried to sit up. His body told him clearly and firmly that this was a bad idea. He settled for turning his head. The room was large. Larger than anything on the iron drift. The walls curved inward near the ceiling in a way that felt intentional, architectural, nothing like the flat metal boxes he was used to. There were beings in the room. Tall ones, silver-skinned, moving quietly around equipment that he did not recognize. One of them noticed that he had moved and said something in a language he could not understand. He was on a Velhari ship. He understood this slowly, the way you understand something when you are still half unconscious and your body is cataloging its injuries in the background. The injuries were considerable. He could feel that much. His left side felt like it had been pressed against something very hot for too long. His ribs ached with every breath. His left hand, when he tried to move it, sent a message to his brain that he chose not to dwell on. His hearing in his left ear was a low, flat ringing instead of sound. A Velhari in a long gray coat came to stand beside the platform he was lying on. The being looked at Cole the way a scientist looks at something unexpected under a microscope, not unkindly, but with a very specific kind of detachment. He had angular features, pale silver skin that caught the light, and eyes that were darker than most Velhari Cole had seen in photographs. His name, Cole would learn later, was Soren Velkoth, and he was the chief physician aboard the Velhari capital vessel that had intercepted the iron drift within hours of the explosion. Soren spoke to someone across the room in Velhari. Cole's translator device had been damaged. He could see it sitting in pieces on a small tray nearby, so he caught none of it. But he was not entirely unconscious either, and the tone of Soren's voice carried information on its own. The physician sounded, if Cole had to guess, somewhere between impressed and annoyed. Like someone who had been proven wrong about something and was not entirely happy about it. Cole's lips were dry. His throat felt like sandpaper. He said, in a voice that came out quieter than he intended, "Can someone get me some water?" It was not a dramatic statement. He was not trying to make a point. He was thirsty, and it seemed like the most reasonable thing to ask for in that moment. The room went still. Every Velhari in the space turned to look at him. Soren stopped mid-sentence. The being he had been speaking to across the room took a small, visible step backward, which struck Cole as a strange reaction. He had not realized that none of them expected him to be conscious. And certainly none of them had expected him to speak. After a long pause, someone brought him water. It was in a container he did not recognize, shaped for hands with 4 fingers, and it took him a moment to manage it with one working hand. But it was cold and clean, and he drank it slowly and felt marginally more human by the end. Soren said something else to the room, and most of the other Velhari filed out quietly. 2 guards remained near the door. And then, after a moment that felt deliberate, a figure appeared at the inner doorway that Cole had not noticed before, a viewing area, separated by a panel of something transparent. She had been standing there for a while, he realized. Long enough that someone must have told her he was awake. Ethan Vel dismissed the remaining staff with a few words and a gesture. The guards at the door exchanged a look, the kind of look that said this is against protocol and also we are not going to say so, and then they too stepped out. She came to stand at the edge of the platform and looked at him with those steady Velhari eyes. She said, in careful, slightly formal human standard language, "You are in pain." "Yes," Cole said. "You should sleep more." "Probably." He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Where's my ship?" "Safe. Docked nearby. Your crew was informed that you required medical attention." She paused. "Your supervisor has been attempting to board this vessel for approximately 18 hours. She has been quite persistent." That would be Lena Vasquez, who ran maintenance operations aboard the Iron Drift and who did not take well to being told she could not go somewhere. Cole felt a dull, tired affection for this information. "You should probably let her on," he said. "We have been considering it." Silence held for a moment. Ethan's expression was difficult to read. Velhari faces were not built the same way human faces were, and the small movements that signaled emotion were different enough that Cole could not always track them. But she seemed to be holding onto something, working toward something she wanted to say. "Why did you do it?" she said finally. It was not quite a question. It was the kind of sentence that had been sitting in someone's mouth for a long time. Cole thought about it. He thought about it honestly, because he did not see the point in being anything other than honest when he was lying on a medical platform with 3 cracked ribs and a hand that was not working right. "I don't know," he said. "You were in the way of it. I was closer." She was quiet for a long moment. "In Velhari culture," she said slowly, "a sacrifice is an exchange. One gives something of value in order to receive something of greater value. It is a calculation." She paused. "You did not calculate." "No," Cole agreed. "Then what was it?" He thought about the army, about training, about the thing they drilled into you until it stopped being a thought and became a reflex. You cover your people, you do not think first, you move and think after. He thought about how that had not stopped when he left the service, how it had just stayed in him like a habit he had never unlearned. "It just seemed like the right thing to do," he said. Ethan looked at him for a long time. She did not seem satisfied with the answer, but she also did not seem to think he was lying. She seemed, if anything, genuinely puzzled in a way that went deeper than the question itself. She left without saying much more. Cole lay back and looked at the clean, steady light above him, and tried to figure out how to move his left hand, and slowly, painfully, started thinking about what happened next. Lena Vasquez got on board the Velhari vessel on the second day, after 19 hours of arguing with people who were technically too polite to argue back but found many creative ways of not opening the door. She was 42 years old, originally from Albuquerque, with short dark hair going gray at the edges and the kind of permanently unimpressed expression that came from spending 2 decades managing maintenance crews on ships that were always one broken seal away from a serious problem. She walked into the medical bay, looked at Cole lying on the platform with burns on his arm and his left hand wrapped in something that glowed faintly, and said, "You look terrible." "Good morning to you too," Cole said. "I've been trying to get on this ship since yesterday." "I heard." She sat down on a low surface near him. It was probably not designed for sitting, but she sat on it anyway, and pulled out her tablet. Then she looked around the room very slowly and deliberately, the way someone does when they are trying to see everything at once without being obvious about it. "Stop cataloging the room," Cole said. "I'm not cataloging anything," she said, and wrote something on her tablet. Cole closed his eyes. Having Lena there made him feel better in the way that familiar things make you feel better when everything else is strange. She was annoying in a way he had gotten used to, and there was comfort in that. 2 days later he was told, through a formal communication delivered by a Velhari official who seemed personally pained by the task, that he and Lena were being transferred. Not back to the Iron Drift. Forward, to the Imperial capital ship, by direct order of Emperor Velharin III. Lena wrote down the name of the ship in her tablet. Cole looked at the official and asked if they had a choice. The official said, with great care, that the Emperor's invitations were not typically declined. They went. The Eternal Meridian was the size of a small city and moved like it knew it. It had been the mobile seat of Velhari imperial power for longer than most human nations had existed. Walking its corridors felt like walking through a government building and a cathedral at the same time. Everything was tall, deliberate, and built to remind you that you were not the most important thing in the room. Cole was given quarters that were, by most measures, extraordinary. The bed was 2 feet too long. Every surface was designed for someone significantly taller than him. The room smelled faintly of ozone, which Lena said was probably some kind of air treatment, and Cole said smelled like the inside of a thunderstorm. They both agreed it was not unpleasant, just strange. Lena's room was down the hall. She appeared at his door within 20 minutes with her tablet already full of notes. "The ventilation system in this section runs on a dual-loop pressure model," she said, stepping inside without being invited. "I've never seen that configuration before. Also, the lights adjust based on your position in the room. Did you notice that? Watch if I walk toward the window." "Lena." "What?" "We're guests of the Emperor." "I know that." Try to act like it. She looked at him for a moment, then looked back at her tablet. I'll try, she said, with the tone of someone who was not going to try very hard. The Imperial Court had opinions about Cole Harmon, and most of them were complicated. The basic facts were not in dispute. A human, a civilian, a maintenance worker, had placed himself between an explosive device and the third heir to the imperial throne. Under Velhari law, this created something called a debt of life, and the debt of life was not a small thing. It could not be paid off with money or resources. It demanded acknowledgement at the highest level. What the court could not agree on was what acknowledgement looked like when the person holding the debt was a human who fixed ventilation pipes for a living. Several nobles argued for a financial settlement. The emperor dismissed this. Others suggested a formal letter of imperial gratitude. The emperor dismissed this too, with less patience. One lord, a younger man named Savan Vel Orn, a cousin of the imperial family with a sharp face and a sharper political mind, argued more forcefully that the situation was an embarrassment. A human, and a common laborer at that, had been placed in the debt register of the imperial family. The optics, he said, were problematic. The precedent, he said, was dangerous. This should be dealt with quietly, efficiently, and concluded before anyone outside the court had time to discuss it in depth. The emperor listened to all of this. He was very old and very still, the way old powerful things tend to be, like something that had learned long ago that movement was not always necessary to make a point. When everyone had finished, he said that Cole Harmon would be received in formal audience, and that was the end of the debate. Cole was told about the audience the evening before it happened. He asked Lena if she thought he needed to prepare anything. Lena said she thought he should probably wear something that fit him, since the Velhari-made clothes they had given him were cut for someone with a longer torso. He agreed that this was reasonable advice. In the end, he stood in the throne room in borrowed clothes that were still slightly too long in the sleeves, in front of a Velhari emperor sitting on a seat that was less a throne and more a structure that contained a throne, something that built the idea of power into the architecture around it. The room was very large and very quiet. The emperor looked at Cole with dark eyes that did not glow the way younger Velhari eyes did. He asked, in careful human standard language that he had clearly not spoken in some time, what Cole wanted in return for his act. Cole thought about it for a genuine moment. "I'd like to go back to work," he said. There was a pause in the room that had texture to it. The translator standing to the emperor's left leaned in and said something quietly in Velhari. The emperor's expression did not change in any way Cole could read, but something shifted in it, some small adjustment of attention, like a lens coming into focus. From the side of the room, Ethan watched all of this. She had seen humans before. She had read reports on them, spoken to diplomats, studied their history in the careful way that heirs to thrones are taught to study things that might one day become politically relevant. She had not, before Cole Harmon, met one who asked to go back to work when offered the consideration of an emperor. She found that she did not quite know what to make of him. This was unusual for her. She generally knew what to make of things. Lord Savan, standing among the court, watched Cole with an expression that was careful and blank and meant nothing good. The diplomatic process, it turned out, moved slowly. There were forms. There were meetings between people Cole never saw, in rooms he was not invited into, about things he was only partially briefed on. The Velhari had a word for the pace at which they preferred to make decisions. It translated roughly as the speed of permanence, which Lena said was either very wise or very frustrating depending on your deadline. Cole had nowhere urgent to be. His hand was still wrapped. His ribs were still sore. He was on a city-sized ship somewhere in the outer edge of neutral space, and going back to the Iron Drift was, for now, not an option. So he did what he always did when he had time and no specific instructions. He filled it. On the third day aboard the Eternal Meridian, he found a problem. He had been walking one of the lower corridors, not because he was lost, though the ship was large enough that getting lost was genuinely possible, but because he had a habit of walking when he was thinking, and the lower decks were quieter than the upper ones and nobody paid him much attention down there. He heard the sound before he saw the problem, a low, uneven hum in the ventilation line that ran along the left wall. He stopped and listened to it for a minute. Then he pressed his palm flat against the wall panel and felt the vibration. A young Velhari technician came around the corner and stopped when she saw him. She was shorter than most Velhari Cole had encountered, still taller than him, with pale eyes and the slightly wary look of someone who had been told the human was harmless but was waiting to confirm this for herself. Cole pointed at the wall. "Your pressure intake on this line is running uneven. There's probably a partial block somewhere in the secondary loop." He paused. "Is there a way to access the panel?" The technician stared at him. He waited. She said something in Velhari that his repaired translator rendered as approximately, "You can hear that? It helps if you put your hand on it," he said. She looked at the wall. She put her hand on it. Her expression shifted in a way that suggested she had heard it before and had either assumed it was normal or had been meaning to look into it. They spent 4 hours on it together. Cole's Velhari was non-existent and her human standard was minimal, but they managed with hand signals, shared tools, and the universal language of pointing at broken things. By the end, the hum was gone. The technician looked at the now quiet panel with an expression Cole recognized as the particular satisfaction of a fixed problem, and then she looked at him and said, carefully, in human standard, "You are good at this." "It's what I do," he said. This became, without anyone planning it, a pattern. Cole moved through the lower and working sections of the ship, fixing small things, helping where he could, and slowly accumulating something he did not think of as a reputation but which was building into one anyway. The working Velhari, engineers, technicians, medical staff, the people whose hands were dirty by the end of the shift, were not the same as the courtiers. They were curious rather than hostile. They watched him with interest rather than suspicion. Some of them started appearing near him when he was working, not to interfere, just to see what he did. Lena noticed all of this and wrote it down in her tablet and said nothing, which meant she was thinking something significant. Ethan began visiting Cole in the informal lounge area near his quarters. In the late part of the day, when the ship's lighting shifted to the warm dimness the Velhari seemed to prefer in the evening. She came without guards the second time, after he mentioned that the guard standing in the doorway made him feel like he was being observed, which he took as honest feedback rather than a complaint. They talked. She was formal at first, careful with her words in the way that people are when they have been trained since childhood to be careful with their words. She asked about Earth, about human history, about the wars. Cole talked about the wars plainly, including the ugly parts. He talked about the mistakes. He talked about the things that went wrong and the reasons they went wrong and the fact that some of those reasons were still being argued over. He did not polish it. He did not curate it the way that Ethan, who had studied Velhari history through its official lens, was used to hearing history discussed. She found this strange. She found it, after a while, more interesting than the polished version would have been. He asked her, one evening, what it was like to be a princess. She gave him the official answer. The weight of responsibility. The honor of service. The importance of carrying the legacy of the empire with dignity. He listened to all of it, and then he waited. She looked at him. He was just sitting there, patient, with his coffee. He had found a way to approximate coffee using the ship's food systems, which Lena called an act of cultural persistence and which Cole called breakfast, and he was not pressing her or prompting her. He was just waiting. She gave him the real answer. It was shorter than the official one. It had more to do with rooms and protocols and always being watched and never being fully certain which part of a relationship was about her and which part was about her title. Cole nodded. He said he imagined that was hard. He did not try to fix it or argue with it or tell her it was worth it. He just said it sounded hard, and meant it. She did not know what to do with that either. But she came back the next evening. Lord Sevan moved on the 11th day. He filed a formal petition with the Imperial Court, a challenge to Cole's continued presence aboard the ship, framed as a matter of imperial dignity and proper Velhari human relations. The petition argued that a maintenance worker of no official standing had been given accommodation and consideration that exceeded what was appropriate for a civilian of his status and species, and that the debt of life, while technically real, had been discharged sufficiently by the medical care provided and the formal audience already granted. The human should be returned to his ship. The matter should be closed. Lena read the translation of the petition and said several things that were not polite. Cole read it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll handle it." "How?" Lena asked. "I'll talk to them." "That's your entire plan? You'll talk to them?" "Yes." Lena looked at him for a long time. "Cole, you are about to stand in front of the Velhari Imperial Court and explain why you should be allowed to stay on their ship. These are people who have been doing politics for 1,000 years. I know. Do you have a strategy? Not really. She closed her tablet. Fine, she said, with the tone of someone who had decided to trust the process even though the process was, by any reasonable measure, underprepared. The hearing was set for the following morning, in a formal chamber where the court assembled in tiered rows, and the subject of the hearing stood alone on a flat floor below them, lit from above in a way that was probably not intended to be intimidating but definitely was. Cole stood there in clothes that now fit a little better because Lena had spent 2 days quietly adjusting them, and he looked up at the assembled Velhari nobles, and he waited for them to ask him something. Lord Sevan presented his case with precision. Every argument was clean. Every point followed logically from the last. He was very good at this. When it was Cole's turn, he did not argue. He did not perform. He looked up at the court and said, plainly, that he had been near someone in danger and he had moved toward it instead of away from it. That where he came from, this was not considered exceptional. That humans did this. That it was what people did when they saw someone who needed help and they were close enough to help them. He said it simply, without drama, without trying to make himself larger than he was. The chamber was quiet for a long time. The Emperor, who had been still the entire time in the way that suggested he had already decided something and was waiting for the room to catch up, said one sentence in Velhari. The translator rendered it afterward, for the record, as, "The hearing is concluded." Lord Sevan did not speak again on the matter. He left the chamber without meeting Cole's eyes. The formal recognition happened on the 14th day. It was not a grand ceremony by Velhari standards. Those involved far more participants and took considerably longer. This was smaller, more deliberate, the kind of event that carries more weight because it is understated rather than elaborate. The Emperor's chamber, the same one where the hearing had been held, was arranged differently this time. The tiered rows were empty. There were only a handful of people present: the Emperor, Ethan, a few senior officials, Lena, and Cole. The Imperial linguists had spent several days working on the problem the Emperor had presented them with. What word, in the Velhari language, described what Cole Harmon had done? There was no word for acting without calculation. There was no word for a being who moved toward danger without a reason that could be written down and examined. The closest the Velhari had ever come to it was in an old phrase used in their early history, before the Empire had fully formed, when they had still been something rougher and less organized. The phrase translated, approximately, as, "one who moves first." It was not a military title. It was not a rank. It was something older than those things, a descriptor that predated the structures that made ranks necessary. It meant a person who did not wait for permission from the situation to act. The Emperor said the phrase in Velhari, and then in Human Standard, and then said that it would be entered into the debt register of the Imperial family not as a debt discharged but as a debt honored. Cole stood there in his now properly fitting clothes and said, "Thank you," because it seemed like the right thing to say and he did not have anything more eloquent ready. Lena, standing 2 steps behind him, wrote something in her tablet. Then, after a moment, she closed the tablet and just stood there, which was how Cole knew that she was actually moved. After the formal part was finished, there were conversations. Lena was introduced to a Velhari scientist named Keth Vel-Oren, who oversaw biological research aboard the ship, and within 20 minutes the two of them were deep in a technical discussion that required 3 separate translator devices working simultaneously. By the end of the day, Lena had a meeting arranged with the Velhari Science Division. By the end of the week, she had the outline of an agreement for a structured exchange of medical knowledge between human and Velhari researchers. It started small. That was how the important things always started. Cole's hand was treated on the final morning before their departure. Soren Velkoth, the physician who had, some days ago, told a room of colleagues that Cole should not have survived on tissue density and pain tolerance alone, performed the procedure himself. It took less than an hour. When the wrapping came off, Cole looked at his hand and moved each finger carefully, checking the range of movement the way a medic would, automatically. It worked. It worked better than it had before the explosion. There was some Velhari biological engineering in the repair that Soren had explained briefly and Cole had not entirely followed, but the result was clear enough. His hand was whole. He sat with that for a moment. He looked at his hand in the clean, steady light of the medical bay. He did not say anything. Soren, who was cleaning up his instruments, glanced over and said, in careful human standard, "It will hold." "I know," Cole said. "Thank you." Soren looked at him for a moment, that same measuring look from the first day, but different now, less like a scientist examining something unexpected and more like something else that did not have a simple name. He nodded, once, and went back to his instruments. Ethan came to find him in the afternoon, in the corridor near his quarters, which he had been walking because he was thinking. She had a small object in her hand. It was smooth and dark, roughly oval, with a faint pattern on its surface that caught the light when she moved it. "This is a navigational token," she said. "In our culture, it is given to someone who is welcome to return to a place. It is registered to this ship and to the Imperial grounds." She held it out. "It means that the door is open to you, if you choose to come back." Cole looked at the token. He took it. It was heavier than it looked. "I might take a while to get back," he said. "I have work." "I know," she said. "But I'll keep it." "Good," she said. She looked at him for a moment more. She had been looking at him differently since the hearing, not more warmly, exactly, but with less of the careful measuring quality and more of something that looked like straightforward regard. Like she had finished working something out and arrived somewhere. She left without saying much more. He stood in the corridor and turned the token over in his repaired hand and thought about what it was to be standing in this particular spot, on this particular ship, holding this particular thing. Then he put it in his jacket pocket and went to find Lena. They left the next morning. The Iron Drift had been reassigned. Cole and Lena were being transferred to a different freighter on a better route, one that ran closer to the outer edge of neutral space and paid somewhat better. Lena considered this an acceptable outcome. Cole considered it fine. The new ship was called the Gray Meridian, which Lena pointed out was a coincidence worth noting and Cole said was just a word. It was newer than the Iron Drift and smelled less like grease, which Cole found he did not mind, and the coffee machine in Bay 2 actually worked, which he appreciated more than he expected to. 3 weeks after they boarded, a junior crew member named Pete, 23, from Ohio, on his first deep space assignment and still slightly wide-eyed about all of it, found Cole in a maintenance corridor fixing a seal on a waterline. Pete had heard things. People talked, on ships. Stories moved through crew quarters the way all stories did, passed from person to person until they were half the size of the real thing and twice as dramatic. "Hey," Pete said. "Is it true? You took a blast for a Velhari princess?" Cole looked up at him. He thought about how to answer. "Not quite like that," he said. "I just moved before I thought about it. Would you do it again?" Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked at his repaired hand, holding the wrench. He thought about a corridor full of smoke, and a long medical platform, and an emperor who asked him what he wanted and a princess who gave him a token that meant come back. He thought about 4 hours fixing a ventilation line with a Velhari technician who had been surprised he could hear the problem, and evenings in a dim lounge talking about history without polishing it, and a physician who said it will hold in careful, deliberate human words. "I don't know," he said. "Probably." He turned back to the seal. Pete stood there for another moment and then went back to work. Somewhere on the Eternal Meridian, moving through the dark between stars at the speed of permanence, a small navigational token sat in a case on a desk in the quarters of a princess who had stopped trying to figure out what to make of Cole Harmon and had simply decided that whatever he was, it was something worth understanding better. And somewhere in the records of the Velhari Imperial Court, in the debt register that went back further than most human histories, an entry had been made in old language that no one had used in a long time. "One who moves first." A human name beside it. And the quiet, careful beginning of something that neither side had a word for yet, but that both sides, slowly, were starting to reach toward.